or contemporary dance, but you're teaching ballet, a little of everything.
Right, absolutely.
That's great.
Absolutely.
That's great. You know, one of the things we're talking about, teaching a little bit of everything, comes to mind. I know you're out there with the high school as well as the Anaheim Ballet. A recent topic has been competitions, because dance competitions have become so, just they're everywhere, and so many schools are participating in them now. And I read an article recently in the New York Times from the Arts, and it was written by Erica Kinetz in July of 2005. And it really brings up the issues of dance in America is very much alive, and the competitive dance circuit is among the most exhilarating, and some say the least artistic, of its manifestations. And it draws into argument, you know, the pros and cons of dance competitions. And of course, we've seen, we've entered some, we've seen some experience, had our own experiences. Can you tell the young people that have come from backgrounds in commercial dance studios that may have participated in competitions or not? Or
well, you know, I can't necessarily always pinpoint, you know, okay, this person is, you know, definitely a competition dancer at first glance. But definitely over time, there are elements of it that are either very, very present from having been involved in competition, or very, very absent. And you know, one of the things that I always talk with the students about specifically is, you know, what's the goal of whatever you're doing. And
that's smart.
The essence of competition is to win.
Yeah.
You know, nobody goes into competition to lose.
Right.
And then it becomes a question of, okay, well, if your goal is to win, how do you enter something that is artistic and win by being the most artistic? And most artistic is self-expression in some way, and yet you're being told what to do.
Yeah.
You know, there are a set number of things you're supposed to do.
Yes.
If you don't do these things, well, you lose, and you're therefore not artistic.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult to say, and I think a large part of it has to do with the coach saying, this is what I want you to find, this is the experience I want you to go for, this is what we're looking for. And I know so many of the articles now are talking about the sexualization of the young kids and how the 6-year-olds are dressing a certain way and dancing a certain way, or that some are saying it's the amount of turns or the amount of making it more of a sport than an art, and that's you know, it's a tough one. Just this past weekend we had an experience. We were invited to dance at a competition, and it's called the Festival de los Niños, Festival de los Niños, and we were actually not competitors, we were just invited guests, and we just got to see again, you know, competition in terms of what the different studios are asking of their young people to do. And the main thing we talk about with our young people is, this is the way we want you to grow artistically. This is what we want you to achieve. This is how we want you to try to inspire the people watching you, and this is your goal. And we did a couple of numbers in that, and you know what? We've got a clip of that. I'm going to show you that now. This is from the Festival de los Niños, and we'll take a look at Anaheim Ballet's participation in that now.
which the only thing we caution people is to make sure that they get a formulation that will last as long as they're going to be outdoors. The difference in strength really is a difference in effectiveness, period, not level of effectiveness, but length of effectiveness. Any other questions?
Yes. What areas in Newport do you regularly treat and patrol?
We regularly patrol the entire city wherever it's needed. We've got probably some gutter segments that hold water during the course of the summer. We're in the back bay a lot. I'm not sure where Irvine ends and Newport begins back there, but
How about like the East Coast to Mesa channel that goes down
Yes.
between the two Dover drives?
yeah, we do that as well. If the water's moving, it's not a problem. But some of those channels don't move very fast. And
Okay, down at like off the end of 23rd Street by Irvine, between Irvine and the bay, there's it seems like there's a lot of standing water in that area.
is it not subject to tidal flow at all?
Most of it isn't.
I can't specifically state whether, how often we get to that point, but if I can check on that and make sure that we are getting to it.
Okay.
But we've got two teams that do nothing but look for gutter segments to work on, and we've got three teams that do nothing but keep flood channels moving. We spend a lot of time in the back bay, keeping those flood channels open, keeping the water moving into the bay. Big Canyon is one of the areas that we fog, which is what causes all the stir when they do it in neighborhoods. We've probably fogged Big Canyon 3 or 4 nights a week, just to keep the adult mosquitoes down.
What part of Big Canyon is that? Starting at the bay and going upstream to Jamboree, or actually in the golf course area?
Below Jamboree, where there's a little flat spot, and then down to the bay.
Okay.
Nowhere near any homes. But there's a wetland in there that we can't get to, really, to effectively treat. So we're forced to treat for the adults once they emerge, and that's very ineffective, but it's all we can do. We fortunately haven't been forced to do anything in neighborhoods at all. We're able to control mosquitoes as larvae, which is a much more effective way to do it, and we don't have to do any adulticiding where there are people active.
If we were to do some improvements in like the Big Canyon area and the environmental, where the wetlands are, how close would we need to get you to those areas, like on some sort of small roadway or pathway, for you to be able to fairly
I think it's the
effectively
vegetation
fog?
in the wetland itself that's the problem. We can get anywhere. Literally, these teams have got machetes and weed whackers, and they go where they need to go. But it's the wetland itself with all the emergent vegetation. Nothing that we can put into it is going to be effective. There are designs that we could share with you on how to have mosquito-free wetlands, but short of that, it's problematic.
Where's our assistant city manager?
Mike, does the fogging affect the bird life?
No, absolutely not. It's very. If anybody believes me, this pesticide that we use is extremely safe and extremely short-lived. There's no residual. It's just that's.
Well, I know that I asked some questions concerning both the dead bird that was found in the Mariners Park, as well as some standing water, and got almost immediate responses back from your staff, and
Good.
Somebody came by and checked up on it, and I was really impressed with the service that was provided and the information that they gave us. So
I'm glad to hear that.
I
But not
would
surprised.
compliment you and your staff
Thank
on
you.
what you're doing.
Any more?
Yes, what's your annual budget?
$9.2 million. And with that, we control mosquitoes, rats, and fire ants, and some flyworm.
Okay, good. Any other questions from council?
Could I ask Mike one more question? What is the status of the fire ant invasion then?
The work that we did as the Fire Ant Authority in South County is holding. Unfortunately, the North County is sort of broken out with the fire ant infestation from Orange up into Yorba Linda, Brea, that area. I believe that most of Newport Beach, with the exception possibly of Newport Coast, doesn't stay warm enough long enough for fire ants to flourish. You never found any close to the beach. So with the exception of Newport Coast, I would say you guys are home free on the fire ants.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, great, thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
Before we go further, Mr. Rosansky, you have anything for the consent agenda? Any clarification?
No, thank you.
Good, thanks.
And Mr. Mayor, before we leave this study session item, Dr. Virginia Barrett continues to serve as the city's representative on the Vector Control District Board, and she was the one that set up Mike being here today in order to give this report.
Good. Thanks to her for volunteer work for the city, too. Thanks. Before we start, we're going to try to target starting our study session in an hour or earlier, our closed session rather, because we've got a lot to talk about. Not to stifle anybody, but we're going to try to shoot to get it started at 5:45 rather than 6. City Clerk?
Item number 3 is the RHINE Channel Remediation Project.
Tom Rossmiller will provide this staff report.
Okay. Do you know the password? I don't even know whose computer it is. Is that yours? Laptop? Oh, yeah, I do have this. Like that. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Okay, City Manager, what are we doing here? Maybe you can fill us in, because we've got people live here that may have gone and turned us off by now.
This study session item regards the RHINE Channel Remediation Project. There's been testing done in the RHINE Channel that Mr. Rossmiller will talk about, the levels of toxic in the RHINE Channel and the requirements that the Regional Water Quality Control Board is setting forward in order to try and work with us to solving this problem.
Good afternoon, Mayor Heffernan and council members. Sorry for the difficulties with our computer and projector, but we're here tonight to talk to you about the RHINE Channel Sediment Remediation Feasibility Project, and I'm joined by Ray Heimstra with Orange County Coastkeeper and Steve Capolino, who's in our audience with Anchor Environmental, one of our consultants, and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Jesse Powell is here representing the Water Board to talk about the feasibility of cleaning up some contamination in the RHINE Channel. Without the slides, I'll try and quickly go through the presentation. Previous studies of the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, Orange County Coastkeeper, and others identified numerous contaminants in the water and sediments of the RHINE Channel. There were also some additional studies done that found very high concentration of the contaminants in fish that live in the RHINE Channel, and in fact, PCB was fingerprinted in the tissue of fish with the same PCB concentrations as were in the sediments. A lot of you probably know Dr. Jack Skinner. He found this particularly disturbing because of the possibility for human illness due to this contamination with consuming the flesh of these fish. I think we're back in business almost. Also, in 1999, the State Water Resources Control Board, through the Bay Protection and Toxic Cleanup Program, listed the Rhine Channel as a toxic hotspot. This is very significant. There's not a lot of toxic hotspots in the state of California, and the state found the contamination to be of enough concern to put the Rhine Channel on with this designation. The state decided to give us a hand in identifying the contamination by executing a $278,000 Proposition 13 grant to the Orange County Coastkeeper to conduct and manage a project to determine the vertical extent of the contamination and develop remediation alternatives. We already knew the horizontal extent of the contamination from the other studies that were completed, but we didn't know how deep the contamination went. Your City Council approved on August 24th of 2004 a local match of $68,000 to go along with this Prop 13 grant and a cooperative agreement with Orange County Coastkeeper to follow through on the study. Next slide. I'm going to turn over the presentation for this part to Ray to talk about a few slides, and then I'll be back and finish it off.
Thank you. I'm sure this is the RHINE Channel project area. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with this area. This is traditionally the industrial part of the bay. So through here we pretty much covered the entire area with sample sites. Next one. So the reason this is more contaminated than the rest of the harbor is because we had things like canneries, metal plating facilities, a lot of boat yards, things like that, and just different types of runoff, everything from using lubricating oils with PCBs, different types of metals, all that stuff ended up in the bay over a period of time. So in November, we went out and collected the core samples. Anchor Environmental came out. We hired them as a consultant on the project, and we assisted them actually in collecting the core samples. We went out to all 16 sites, used these 8-foot core tubes along with a piston core, and hammered it down by hand to clean sediment as deep as we could possibly get them, and then collected all core samples from all 16 sites. Okay, so this is a map of some of the debris. There's a lot of debris all over the bottom of it. This is primarily going to be coming into play when the dredging starts in the area. Some of the other issues that we found are there's a lot of structural damage. About 400 foot of the channel has some kind of structural damage to pilings or the breakwater to bulkhead that's going to need to be taken care of.
In a previous position I had with the county, my boss used to always ask me, how bad is the contamination really? As you show us a lot of numbers and graphs and figures, and to a layperson, what does all that mean? He says, what I'd really like to see is the body count. And I really can't show you a body count with the data that we accumulated, but I can try and show you in some graphical terms how bad the contamination of those sediments really were. And We color-coded the data in this one figure to show the violation of standards. And the standards are effects-based, so the effects that they were looking at are those kind of effects on the biota that could cause death to different types of organisms that live in the water, or illness, or problems with reproduction or respiration, things like that. And so these effects-based standards were set by the agencies to really try and find and show us some sort of body count. And on this particular graph, those that are shaded yellow show violation of one of the standards. The orange show violation of two of the standards, and the red shows violation of three of the standards, which you can see by this chart that many of the standards were severely violated throughout the samples that we took in the harbor. What we found mostly were problems with trace elements such as lead, copper, and zinc. PCBs and DDT also showed higher concentration at higher elevations in the cores, and the trace elements throughout the cores. Next sample. We wanted to take a look at what we can do with those contaminated sediments, and one of the things that we knew we had to do was get them out of the channel. The most obvious way to do it was dredging, but there's a lot of different dredging methods, and we didn't know what methods might be allowed by the different regulatory agencies. So we took a look at them, and some of the alternatives include mechanical dredging, which you may have seen in the lower bay with a big clamshell, or hydraulic dredging, where there's big suction pumps that pump it into a barge. We had to consider whether we would remove or leave those existing structures that were damaged and could become more damaged with the dredging. Did the bulkhead need replacement in some areas? Would it stand if we removed 3 to 5 feet of sediment? We had to take a look at all that. Could we do? Yes.
Was there ever thought just to encapsulate what's there and leave it there?
Was. The average depth is about minus 10 to 11 through that area, and if we put the 2-foot cap, which would be required to encapsulate it, it would bring us to a minus 8 and would severely prohibit safe navigation in that area.
And that was enough to dismiss it? I mean, I think you're going to come with a big number at the end of this.
We also looked at taking part of the sediments out and then capping it, trying to reduce our costs, and that didn't show to be cost effective either. So we didn't dismiss it. We looked at a whole range of alternatives and sub-alternatives that might be the most cost effective.
Tell what is the depth of the contaminants?
In some areas, like up closest to the Rhine Wharf, it goes the full depth of the accumulated sediments down to the natural material, which is about 5 feet. In other areas, it's about 3 feet in depth.
Okay, thanks.
We also looked at whether or not we needed to treat the material as we were removing it, or as we would use it in some disposal alternative. So we took a look at a number of alternative treatments. We also looked at what were our alternatives for disposal. On-site confined disposal facility would be something like filling in little indentations where the Rhine Channel doesn't have a straight bulkhead all the way the full length of it. There are indentations, so we could straighten out that bulkhead along the Army Corps of Engineers established bulkhead line, fill that in and dispose of some material there. We could possibly dispose of it at some future Port of Long Beach fill area where they're building container facilities. And so we've taken a look at options like that. We also looked at confined aquatic disposal methods where you essentially just dig a deep hole and take the existing sediments, which could be reused, and take those completely out of the bay, use them for beach replenishment or something like that, and fill that hole with the contaminated sediments and then cover it. So that's another alternative that we took a look at. And then lastly, we took a look at disposing of the material at some upland disposal site, as simple as your regular Class 3 landfill or as complex and expensive as a Class 1 landfill. Next slide, please. What we came up with was 4 remediation alternatives that we thought were really important to consider further and to have the regional board consider further when they develop their TMDL action plan. The first alternative is the obvious one, the no action alternative. And you can see that the evaluation criteria that we looked at was technical effectiveness for short and long term, implementability, environmental impacts for water quality, biological impacts, things like that. Permittability is a huge thing because not all the alternatives have really good permittability with all the different agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers, the Regional Board, the Coastal Commission, the State Lands Commission, that we all have to sell this project to. Whether or not we'll need resource mitigation while doing the project, and institutional impacts like effects on current land use and zoning and regulations that are already established. And then, of course, we looked at the cost of the alternatives. Alternative 2 was the dredge and the upland disposal, which is really a good alternative. It rated really well in all of our evaluations, except the finding a landfill close by that will accept the material has been difficult. We're trying to cut our costs by getting the Orange County Integrated Waste Management Agency to accept the landfill as daily cover, and treating the material so that it could be used as daily cover, and we're running into some difficulties there. That could save us a substantial amount of money if we could do that. We avoid a tipping fee of $27, $28 a ton, which is considerable for the 110,000 cubic yards that we have to remove in this project. You can see that there are sub-alternatives here under each of the alternatives where we say not including the cost of the bulkhead repair. And we did that because we feel that we need to look at further whether or not public agencies should pay for the cost of the bulkhead repair, or whether it should be borne by the individual property owner, because so many of the bulkheads are in such very poor condition right now. So that was considered in these alternatives. And you can see that the cost of the bulkhead repair, where it's in really bad shape, is about $1 million.
Did the city install the bulkheads we're talking about? Or
No,
were
they did not.
Privately installed?
They were privately installed.
So that would kind of lead to they should probably be done by the private individuals, right?
That's right. Could we go back? The range in cost was about $6.4 million with the dredge with the near-shore contained disposal to about $17 million with the dredge and upland disposal. We think we could reduce that substantially, $2 to $3 million with avoiding the tipping fees. But any way you look at it, it's a very expensive project to do. And this next slide shows that we looked at a number of potential funding sources at all levels. First, we looked at the federal level by investigating whether or not we could get support from a direct appropriation from one of our members of Congress, whether or not each individual property owner could apply for brownfield cleanup and redevelopment grants, or whether 319H grants could be issued for the from the Clean Water Act for non-point source cleanups. We also looked at the state level for Prop 50 grants, especially those related to the Clean Beaches Initiative, or something that may be written into future propositions in the 2006 election. The Ocean Plan is also proposing to have funding available for remediation, and remediation is definitely going to be part of the future Ocean Plan. I think timing is important there. The regional board is looking for us to implement some sort of action within the 5 to 10 year range. The Ocean Plan funding may not be available within that time period. And then we look creatively towards some local funding, possibly assessment of property owners, a harbor-wide fee, establishment of a redevelopment project area. We looked at harbor permit fees, all of them, the residential dock, commercial dock, the mooring fees and potential increases there. We also looked at full recovery of our costs for our regional general permit dredging projects. We don't currently receive full recovery for those costs. We're at about 30% there. And we also looked at residential slip leasing fees as a potential local funding source, so that there's a large possibility of local funding sources to help defray the costs. We especially wanted to look at ways to reduce the project costs by, like I said earlier, using material for daily cover at landfills, convince the landfill operators to waive the tipping fees, or maybe even to use the material as subbase on some local road projects. So we don't think that any one of these funding sources is going to fund the entire project. We think it'll probably be a combination of funding sources that we'll go after. But this is a project that's in its feasibility phase. I think the next action you'll see is the Regional Water Quality Control Board holding some public hearings and developing a new total maximum daily load regulation that will require us to come up with a plan in a short time period, and then implementation of that plan within 10 years. So I think that's about the timeline that we're looking at.
Would you be comfortable sharing what your thoughts on those various 3 funding sources, what you think in dollars they could potentially deliver?
I think direct appropriation through Congress could be a very significant amount. We're working to find funding for the remainder of the Lower Bay in dredging, and I think we may be able to combine dredging projects. The Army Corps of Engineers is out to bid right now for a big dredging project in the Upper Bay. we'd like to combine that with a Lower Bay project and then maybe have this ride on its coattails. So I think that's probably the most feasible, high percentage funding, probably 65% of the cost. It could be federal funding with a 35% local match. The local match could be state monies. And I think Proposition 50 is probably our best local source for getting the 35% local match that we could come up with. I think that does it for the slides in my presentation. I have some additional slides for possible questions that I may get.
If this is disposed at a local landfill in a class, did you say class 3? That's just like where we would dispose our refuse?
Right,
And
Bowerman.
you'd use it as fill material? I'm a little confused. If it's that contaminated that we got to remove it from the harbor and bay, why wouldn't it be too contaminated to go into the landfills?
The marine contamination standards are different than the landfill contamination standards that differentiate whether it has to go to a Class 1 landfill or can be disposed of at a Class 3 landfill. They're orders of magnitude different.
Thank you.
Is this, what is the potential here for damage to people? I mean, contamination for damage to people, direct contamination.
It's the contaminants that are found in the sediments can be carried through the food chain, and we're seeing PCBs in fish tissue that has the same fingerprint as the PCBs in the RHINE Channel. And Dr. Skinner expressed some concern to me about pregnant women consuming the fish from lower Newport Bay, and fish with PCBs are found throughout the bay, and some damage to their newborn.
Now, is this found, or is this found at levels that are dangerous?
PCBs?
Yeah.
Specifically?
In other words, do we find one that we can measure, the PCB, or are we finding concentrations that are serious?
We're finding significant concentrations of PCBs in the sediment.
Now, this sediment is the real soft, loose stuff that we would really need to remove anyway to get our bay back, or is this?
It's very fine-grained silts and clays primarily. It could be small percentage sand. I think geologists would probably classify it as silty sand.
Now, it looked like this was widespread little spots in the bay, not in excepting one local spot that you showed that seemed to be well contaminated. But if that were the case, you would be just grossly pulling out silt, but only a little of it would be contaminated, or am I
There have been sediment samples taken throughout the bay. In our original proposal to the State Water Resources Control Board in that grant, we wanted to study other locations of the bay in more detail, but they didn't have enough funding to go around, so they asked us to focus on the area that previous studies had shown were the most contaminated, and that is that RHINE Channel area from 19th Street to Violito that showed the most significant contamination.
I guess where I'm getting at, obviously we haven't considered that so contaminated that we restrict activity there to any great extent. I don't think people like go swimming there, but basically I don't believe you're restricting boating or storing boats or anything else there. My question is, have we been wrong in that, or is this level of contamination actually quite small?
The contamination is in the sediments, and people and boats generally, except when they run aground in the channel, don't come in contact with the sediments. And so that people contact with the sediments hasn't been a real issue. It's what it does to the food chain, and then eventually goes through the food chain and impacts us and the food chain.
I only have one more comment there, and that is, I don't think that most people consider that a very good place to eat fish from, you know. Why, in other words, we don't go to L.A. Harbor to go eat fish that's caught in the harbor. We don't, these are working harbors. Are we missing something here? I don't think you're getting you'd have to dig up the whole thing to get a pristine harbor, and then why would that be? This doesn't make sense to me, is what I'm saying.
Councilman, I'll try and answer that for you. If you're getting at is where does this fit in the larger scope of problems for the Bay? To some extent, that doesn't matter. The the Regional Water Quality Control Board and the State Board have identified the RHINE Channel as its major toxic hotspot for this region. As such, they're developing the TMDL to clean it up. We're going to be forced to clean it up, whether we like it or not, because the Federal Clean Water Act says that any water body that's impaired by a contaminant, in this case the contaminant being PCB and several other contaminants, has to be cleaned up back to the Clean Water Act standards. So that's our challenge. I think you're right. People don't necessarily fish there, but it doesn't matter. The federal law and the state law interpretation says we need to get to a fishable, swimmable bay.
Let me ask another question. Is there any right to have, I mean, I go back to this encapsulation. Once you start moving that stuff around, it's going to be dispersed in the water throughout the bay, it seems. There's no way to do it in a clean, precise way. Is there any right to have a boat in that part of the Rhine Canal? Why couldn't you, in other words, we just dismiss encapsulating it because we can't have navigable waters, but is there any right to have any boats in that area of the harbor? I mean, this is you're telling $12 to $15 million to do something you hope works.
We know we can, at that cost, take it down to clean native material. We found clean native material in our borings. There are methods to remove that material without dispersing it throughout the remainder of the bay. And the regional board will be requiring us, actually, to use methods such as siltation curtains to keep any material that is suspended in the water column within that one area that we're working. So there are feasible methods to clean up that area. Whether or not we fill it in and make it ball fields or a park.
No, that's not my point. My point is, this sounds a little, theoretical of what we're doing versus what the standard is. The standard, they want to go back to the time of Adam and Eve, but the fact is that this is going to, who knows what the real cost is once you get in there. And I'm saying before we start stirring it up, are we sure this is the only option to clean it up? Because it is to remove it.
You mean as opposed to setting a cement cap or actually taking the waters and making
Or
them
just
no
putting a
longer
cap
waters?
or something and reducing the size of boats that use that part of the harbor.
Well, I don't know what state law would say about whether or not we can actually take or impact navigation in that manner when there are other options before us that would maintain the navigation that exists today.
Okay, let me show you the other question. We're not the only one who have this problem.
That's right. San Diego has a significant problem with it.
Well, what are these other, that's the market working. What are they doing?
They're not along as far as we are in developing a plan.
We're on the bleeding edge of this one, but
Statewide, we're on the leading edge?
We think
Yes.
so. We're going to go ahead and partner with them if there's an opportunity to get into a new bond act and get a carve-out for a project for
sediment remediation projects across the state and get one allocated to this one if there's a bond in 2006.
I have another question. PCBs have nothing to do with paint. They have nothing to do with, they're oils. They're the heat transfer oils and the things that we use in transformers. They're very heavy oils. And they're very similar to what we're getting right out of the ground right now in our oil wells. And my question is this natural occurring, or is this, or have you really identified this as something that was caused by man? Because we're getting PCBs, and I can prove that, right out of our oil wells, and we're thinking they're really good blending components for plastics. But did you hit something natural here, or did you hit?
No, there have been historic transformer accidents in the Rhine Channel watershed that have spilled PCBs into the storm drain system and then into the channel.
Because I'm just saying, these aren't from paints, marine paints. These are not. This is from heat transfer fluids, predominantly in the transformers.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, and they're very heavy, but they're almost the same. I'm not even sure that they're heavier than water. Basically, in salt water, in specific gravity. I'm not exactly. They're just tied to the silt because the silt they adsorb onto. That's what you're finding too?
That's correct.
Okay, so then can you specifically locate these, or the PCBs from transformers, they should be specific and in smaller areas, not located throughout the bay we say that they're terribly bad for people, but I'm not sure of that.
I didn't bring a slide that shows the aerial extent of the PCBs on a horizontal plane, but there are areas around storm drain outlets and back close to the Rhine Channel Wharf where you find higher concentrations of PCBs in the sediments, and it's principally in the upper levels of the sediments, indicating that they've been not long ago historic deposits, but in relative 20-year
Let me ask just one
historic
more really
deposits.
biting question. Those transformers that we're talking about that might have leaked or must have leaked through the storm drain system are the same ones we're now undergrounding with the very same technology. Are we causing some of this to come back and revisit us all over?
I don't think we have any PCBs in any existing transformers anymore. I think those have all been phased out years ago.
I think that's the only kind of heat transfer fluids that they put in them.
No, I recently spoke with Edison on that issue, and they're using mineral oil now in their transformers.
Okay, so, but what, PCBs are, 15 years old? That was the standard.
Yeah, they don't go away. So the ones that are in the channel have been there for quite a while. And they're also used as cutting fluids for
15-year-old
shops.
transformers, when they were new and put in the ground, last for 30, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
So almost all the transformers that we're using today have PCBs in them. There's only a few of brand new ones that have anything else.
I can't be certain about that. What I was told by Edison is that they've changed out most of those, that they use mineral oil in all of their stuff now.
Councilman Daigle?
Yes, I'm really starting to regret that I ordered the daily fish special for lunch. But, anyhow, Dave, did you have any additional thoughts on funding opportunities?
No, I helped Tom work on that list, and I think, as Tom said, it's going to be a balance. I think the regional board and the state officials are going to look to us to make some local contribution, and that's why there's a healthy list of things that would affect our locality in contributing to these matches.
Is that means if they're expecting us to make some local contribution, does that mean they're going to make a significant state and federal contribution in order to encourage us to make a local contribution?
No, only if we do the grunt work on that. We're going to have to get into a bond act. We're going to have to contact our member of Congress and put this into the appropriations process. They're not going to that's not what they do. They say, here's the problem, you solved it. They don't sit there and say, here's the funding for it necessarily. That's been the past.
This isn't another unfunded state mandate, is it?
It's a federal mandate, actually, so the state, I think, gets off the hook.
Unfunded federal mandate?
But
Dave, what's the penalty to the city if the city requests state and federal funding and they don't follow through with it and they're wanting to stick us with the cost of it? What's the penalty to the city if we don't do it?
it varies. Violations of if they eventually find us so stubborn or so unable to do the self-help and start to fine us under the Clean Water Act, I think it's $25,000 a day at the ultimate penalty.
City Attorney?
But as I heard Tom say, there's going to be, they first have to establish the TMDLs, they have to have us initiate a plan, and then they're going to give us 10 years to implement it.
They would like to see us with the plan underway in 5 years with completion in 10.
Right.
So is that the gun to our head, 5 years?
That's our window to get our funding together, 5 years.
Okay, then why are we here today?
Because the state board will take this report and start to have hearings on it, and you'll see it in the print, and we wanted to let you know that it was out there.
So what are we reacting to today? A state mandate that we give them a report? Or a plan? Are we picking a plan to fix it today, or are we just providing?
No, this is just informational. Actually, Jesse Powell is here in the audience from the state board, and Jesse's listening to everyone's reaction and wanted to hear the presentation as well. And then the regional board, on behalf of the state board, will take it and implement it into a specific TMDL, or total maximum daily load, for the RHINE channel that involves this implementation period, the 5 years, the 10 years.
What do they exactly do? Do they identify the extent of the problem and tell you how clean they want it to be and leave it up to you to fix it?
That's right.
Okay, and so what are we doing today? Showing them how messed up it is?
Well, we know it's messed up. We didn't know the extent of how messed up it was until this.
Okay, so is that what we're doing today? We're giving them all our reports on our investigations.
That's right.
And then they take it, and then they set the standard, and they give us, not them, a deadline to do the work.
That's right. Although the standards they're using are the Clean Water Act standards generally, and the Port of Cologne Act of the state.
All right, so
they're not just winging it.
So they're really going to give us a deadline to fix it.
That's right.
We already know what the standards are, because they're federal.
That's right.
And so when might that be? The cleanup deadline?
Again, from what we've been told, the final cleanup deadline will be about 10 years from now, with the expectation that we start the work 5 years from now.
Good.
10 years from now, it should be clean.
Right. I was going to say, this is sort of like the witch hunt of mercury in water. Nobody's established that the levels that mercury is found in water back east, that it's a problem. But they've said that according to clean water rights, that, oh boy, that's terrible. You can't have it that way. And are we going around looking for a problem to solve? Because I have a problem here. This is not caused by our industry going into the bay. This is caused by superficial leaks of transformers, according to everything that I can tell, and they're occurring at the storm drains. So this does not seem to be a prolific problem, or one that's not faced everywhere in America, and I'm wondering whether we're going out hunting for a problem to solve.
Well, remember, council member, it's not just PCBs. There's a variety of contaminants that are in the RHINE channel from a variety of activities, including the shipbuilding and the ship maintaining and the cannery activities. So it's not.
We're talking entirely about PCBs
that's
as being the big one.
Actually, the final report looks at probably 7 or 8 different chemicals, and we'd be happy to share that with you if you want to research it on your own. But again, this was identified previously, well before any of us got into town, as the toxic hotspot for the regional board, and they were the ones who said, City of Newport Beach, you got to start finding out what's down there. We didn't head down this path on our own.
No, I understand that, and I understand that we found some of this, but I'm saying that at least in the PCB area that we seem to be focused on as as the heavy contaminant here, the one that really is going to cause the fish damage and stuff like that. My comment is it's not from industry. This is something that's happening everywhere, and we may have a little more silt that's picking this up, but I'm wondering whether we're hunting for a problem to solve rather than this. Generally speaking, if you're on the cutting edge and trying to solve a problem that nobody else has ever looked at, you spend millions more than anyone else.
Mr. Ross Miller, do you want to address that?
Yes,
question?
thank you, Mayor. We looked at a number of constituents of concern I showed in that one slide with those that were shaded red, orange, and yellow, and there could be any of those constituents shaded, including lead, copper, zinc, DDT, that could be the driving force. PCB, I just brought up because you asked the question of, is there any danger related to humans? And so I answered that question with the PCBs. But any of those other constituents of concern could also be the driving force in the regional board requiring us to do the cleanup, not just the PCB.
I would note that DDT is being reintroduced throughout the limited world, the third world nations, because it's doing such an effective job with malaria throughout all of Africa. And DDT and harm of individuals, boy, that data was so false as to be ridiculous.
Mr. Rosansky?
Well, I think we beat this to death. I'll just weigh in here. Personally, I think it's a laudable goal to clean up our harbor. I hope that we would, as a city, hope to achieve a harbor where we could swim in and could fish in and eat the fish that comes out of there. I won't swim in the harbor today, and I won't eat a fish out of the harbor today. And so if I won't swim in it and I won't eat out of it, it's not clean, and it needs to be cleaned up. I applaud the staff's efforts in taking the leadership that we're showing as a city to work towards potential cleanup in the future. I mean, obviously, we can't break the bank here as a city because it's probably not just our problem. It is more of a regional and national problem. And to the extent that we can cooperate in bond efforts to get financing to help defer some of the costs or defray some of the costs, I certainly, if you're looking for guidance or whatever, that would be my guidance anyway, to try and do that and work with the state and federal governments and come up with guidelines that we can live with. But it is a problem, and to say that people in third world are using DDT, this is not the third world, and they have a bigger problem there. We don't have malaria here. So, if it comes down to being dead or something maybe in the third world, that's a different story. But here it's not the third world. And so I don't think we aspire to live to third world standards. Thank you.
And separately, is this money where Thailand's money could be used for? Is it Thailand? I hope it's a Thailand's issue. Is it? And secondly, do we post that site now? I mean, are people fishing off the Rhineland Wharf right now as we're speaking? Do we post it? Because you're telling me how bad it is. Do we post people don't fish here, don't eat things you catch here?
Tom, do you know there's a county-wide advisory, I think?
There is a county-wide advisory for certain types of fish, and Health Department, I believe, has postings.
And it's not don't eat any fish at all. It's a quantity that they believe you could consume in any 1 month, and I think it does advise against pregnant women. So that's actually bay-wide.
Or do we post the wharf? I mean, do we do it? Would common sense tell people? You're telling you're going to spend $50 million dredging.
We haven't done I don't know that we've done individual postings because they have to be done in so many different languages and maintain that the county uses that advisory instead. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tom.
You're right. And the fish traverse the entire bay, so it is a bay-wide problem that I don't think just posting the Rhine Channel would be very effective.
No, I'm not saying, but you're saying this is how it's transmitted. This is the worry you have, because that's how it gets into people's tissue. And but apparently it's not severe enough that we'd post.
Well, they do. remember, the county has worked on this for some time, and they try to work within the demographics that fish in Newport Bay, and that tends to be a demographic not from Newport Beach. So they'll do advisories in Vietnamese and Cambodian language, newspapers, for instance, and to try to get to the people before they actually come down. So they're pretty good about that. They've been working on this for probably 15 years to make sure the advisories are appropriate.
Okay, Mr. Webb?
Well, do they, when somebody goes in to get a fishing license, is that part of the document that they have to sign that, hey, this is a fishing license, I want to fish in the bay, there's an advisory? Is that gone to that extent? Because it seems like to me that would be quite an effective way of
We'll find out.
notifying.
Yeah. No. Rich says no. We'll find out more about that. That's something we don't know a lot about.
Mr. Rossman, do you have more? He says additional.
I just had some slides held in reserve in case I had some questions that I needed to answer with pictures.
All right, did we trip any of those?
No, you did not.
Okay.
I asked one more.
Should have.
Supposing we were to just dredge the bay as we normally do, and we put this out to sea, the silt that we are getting from the bay, isn't that typically too fine and so forth to put on the beaches?
In some locations, that's true. In this location, that certainly is true. We did a dredging project when I first came to the city almost 2.5 years ago, where we dredged the entrance channel and part of the main channel into the harbor, and that was sufficiently sandy to go into the nearshore zone so that the sand could move to West Newport. The other locations of the bay don't exhibit similar characteristics. It's more silty and clay, and those clean sediments can be deposited in the LA3 disposal site when that receives its permanent designation in about another month. And
you're saying these cannot?
These cannot be deposited in LA3.
And there is some justification here. I mean, somebody's really made the. You were talking about a C-type disposal in some ways for these things. My question is why could we use other than LA3, for example, and dispose of them? What do they use down at? I mean, that one down there closer to the port, they're using for the things they're taking out of the port.
One of the alternatives that I described was a CAD site where you do dig a deep hole and deposit the material in the hole and then cap it. But that can't be done outside the surf zone. It has to be done within the bays and the harbors per EPA regulations.
So you're saying that has to be in shallow areas, and when we talk about shallow, what kind of depths are we?
It's not so much depth regulated because some of those CAD sites in Long Beach Harbor are fairly deep. They're as deep as 40-something feet. And they were borrow sites for material for the oil islands. And those are some of the sites that we're looking into, as well as new container facilities that will be constructed that need fill material. And EPA and the regulatory agencies are asking the port to look at dealing with contaminated sediments on a regional basis. There are other contaminated sediments in locations like Marina del Rey and Port Hueneme that are similar with quality problems like these sediments that need a regional contaminated sediment disposal site. And so there is actually a task force that is trying to deal with that on a regional basis.
This would seem to make sense to combine these wastes that are particularly bad, maybe barge them up there or barge them wherever this sites are going to be, or landfill even, and maybe get rid of whatever barges we have of that particular area. But it seems to me that this is more or less solved outside of really hotspot areas, which should be isolated to the where the storm sewers are, by just simply dredging. And would that not be the case?
No, EPA and other agencies significantly control what material can be dredged and what material can be disposed of and where and how. There's a lot that goes
But you're saying that these other areas have the same kind of material and they have no place to put it.
Right, and that's why the Contaminated Sediments Task Force is looking at a regional approach to dealing with this problem.
It would seem that we want to get in on that because it makes a lot more sense.
Sure.
Okay, we're going to try to wrap this up. Anything else by the council?
I'd just like to say I'd like to get a copy of whatever gets sent to the Regional Water Quality Control Board, take a look at it.
Sure.
Okay, anything more for us? Tom, you have anything more for us?
No.
Okay, good. We'll move on then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all your time, work. City Attorney?
I want to see if anybody has any public comment on this item.
Sure. Public comment on this item? Okay, nothing. City Clerk?
Public comments. Public comments are invited on non-agenda items generally considered to be within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes.
Public comments are open and closed. City Clerk? What's next?
Adjournment.
Okay, we'll adjourn to closed session and then re-adjourn for a regular meeting starting at 7 o'clock. Thanks.